of Ukraine came into effect. This law was caused by the recent annexation of Crimea by the Russian Federation. More about this law, what its consequences are, what it means for us, what it means for people still living in Crimea, we will speak today with our legal experts. And it is my pleasure to introduce Andriy Huk, who is attorney at law, senior associate at Marchenko Danevich law firm. Thank you.
Evening.
Welcome to our studio. And Anastasia Filipuk, who is junior associate at the Marchenko Danevich law firm. Thank you. Welcome to our studio. Glad to see you. So speaking about this law generally, so we had the referendum in Crimea March 16th, and then all the actions that took place regarding the annexation of Crimea in the middle of March. And now we have this law 1 month later, April 15th, dated April 15th. So we have this 1 month of basically a gap in legal regulation of the status of everything in Crimea. How would you comment on that as a lawyer, as practicing lawyers?
Maybe it's hard to understand that already whole months have passed, but still for the lawyers to provide society with a quick reaction on all this action, it was not so easy. Even on when the process began with this law, we had a lot of reactions from United Nations, from European Union. For example, United Nations reacted very strictly on all restrictions that Ukraine wanted to provide for exit and entering the territory of Crimea Peninsula. And when we had this reaction, we excluded all these clauses regarding restrictions for the citizens of Ukraine. And now we have this law when for citizens of Ukraine there are no restrictions to enter or exit from the territory of the peninsula. We have just checkpoints for Ukrainian citizens and special permissions for foreigners. But still, so this month, I think as a lawyer that this is not so very big time constraint for such a law. And still we refused to put clauses on business and commercial activities in this law, and we still will be waiting for another law, for separate law that will regulate business activities in Crimea.
Overall, would you say that this law was necessary one to come into effect now, or do you think that more time should have taken and they should have come up with a more elaborate draft, a broader draft that would cover more issues?
Well, I would say that it was a necessary law and it had to be taken because, of course, the situation with Crimea after its occupation by the Russian Federation, it created a sort of a vacuum, sort of a legal void, and legal entities and individuals did not really know how to behave themselves in this situation. And well, of course, although some rules, like with regards to the citizenship, could be gleaned from the general Ukrainian legislation, but everyone waited for the general reaction, for more concrete reaction from the Ukrainian government, from the Ukrainian parliament on these issues. And I would like to say that I agree with Andriy that it was a fairly quick response from our parliament. Because the referendum took place on the 16th, and the draft law was tabled in the parliament on the 20th. I think that, well, till the last moment, no one was actually expecting, nobody could predict that all these things could happen in such a short period of time. And I think that considering all the circumstances, it was a rather short period of time. And then, of course, there were negotiations, and we waited for the reactions from the international bodies. So I guess I agree with Andriy that, well, it was like a fairly reasonable amount of time considering the circumstances.
So we should not actually be criticizing our government for too late a response with this law. We should think that it was a timely and actually as quick as possible procedure taken for this law.
Well, of course, there is no procedure for acting in these circumstances, and I'm sure that our authorities are acting in are doing the best they can considering the situation. Although, of course, the current version of the law that we have is also not ideal, it's not covering a lot of issues, but it's still something, and it is a good attempt, in my opinion, to solve the legal issues that appeared.
Okay. Thank you. So speaking about the law per se, what issues did it regulate, and what matters did it clarify for the citizens of both Ukraine, those who live on the continent, and those who are in Crimea? So what are the main issues?
Okay. First of all, the law on occupied territories, it clearly ascertained Ukrainians' rights to Crimea, that Crimea is an inalienable territory of Ukraine, and the Ukraine tried to cover such issues as entry-exit from and into the territory of Crimea, the status of property, the citizenship, and also the activities of state agencies, state bodies, and courts in the territory of Ukraine, well, among other things.
Mm-hmm. So you already touched, Andrei, a little bit about entry-exit, that those are just checkpoints, and we need only identification documents for Ukrainians to enter the territory. Is that correct?
Yes. Originally, when the draft came out, Ukraine wanted to make some restrictions for entering the territory of Peninsula. But our parliament was criticized by United Nations and the European Union, and now we have no restrictions. And moreover, Ukraine also wanted to terminate all property agreements and all property issues in Crimea. But again, we received some portion of critics, and now they are allowed all actions regarding property, but not in the territory of Crimea Peninsula. So if you want to sell some real estate, you can do it, but on the territory of Kherson and Zaporizhia. But still, there are a lot of issues here. What I wanted to add is that this law begins with some declaration that Russian Federation violated a lot of international agreements, General Gag Convention, Geneva Convention, and especially Budapest Memorandum. So Ukraine don't recognize citizenship of Russian Federation because we have a separate law of Russian Federation on adding Crimea, on recognizing Crimea as a subject of Russian Federation.